two, three. One, two, three. Let's go.
Hi there, and welcome back to Culture in Action presented by Whistle. I am Alexa Doebler, your host, and this month we will be talking about all things mental skills education. So our guest is Kassie Gray, and she is the founder of Female Footballers. I'm excited to dive into talking all things mental skills and player and coach education. So without further ado, I will introduce Kassie for you. Kassie Gray is the founder and executive director of Female Footballers, which is a nonprofit organization with the goal of educating and empowering female soccer players through mental skills mentorship. With 10 years of curriculum development and social emotional teaching, she is a passionate advocate for female athletes and whole player development. Well, thank you so much for being here, Kassie. We so appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, so before we get started, I would love to hear a little bit about your background and your journey and what Female Footballers is and what you all do there.
Absolutely. So I'm born and raised in San Jose, California, and currently living here too. I grew up playing soccer from the age of 5, played comp soccer, stayed with my own club team because I loved my teammates so much and was able to play ODP back in the day. And that's how I kind of got seen through soccer, made it through the state, regional, and national team at U18, got recruited to play at UC Berkeley. And so I played there for 4 years, had a great experience. That's kind of a game-changing aspect of my life, was being a part of that team. The school culture, it really changed my life. Doing soccer clinics, called it Female Footballers. And that grew over time and really honed in on the area of focus, which was the mental side of the game. So in 2020, we kind of rebranded during the pandemic of what we really offered and what we do. And so what we are now is we are a bunch of former and current female athletes that offer mental skills mentorship. And so we do Zooms and in-person mental skills sessions to girls 10 to 18, but we've also worked with college teams and semi-pro teams, and it's just something we really love. And I've used my ability in education and curriculum development to create unique sessions in social emotional learning.
Well, that's great. I love it all. I would love it if you could speak a little bit to kind of what you were seeing in terms of like gaps or maybe lacking, things provided for players that led you down the path of mental skills training.
Yeah, well, growing up, I didn't have any of that and didn't even think it really was a thing until I got to college. When I played collegiately, I had an assistant coach who was a female. It was the first time I ever had a female coach. And my head coach, although he was great, he was more of a yeller. He gave feedback in a very direct kind of not negative tone, but definitely a tone that I didn't respond well to.
Sure.
And my assistant coach would approach me later and kind of sugarcoat it a little, and just she kind of was in tune with knowing that that didn't motivate me. And I learned around 18 or 19 that I kind of was more sensitive, that I needed to be, I needed more mental toughness. I met with a sports psychologist and I just started to learn about myself. And so when I was looking at in 2014, when we kind of started Female Footballers, my husband was a director of coaching at the time for our local club here. And he was explaining how youth soccer had changed a lot. And I was getting the impression that it was so individualized, that the team camaraderie piece that I really thrived on, that got me through, was kind of missing. And then just hearing sort of the tiered structure for girls and knowing child development through education, was thinking that's a big aspect that's missing. So we started just with team building sessions when we would do clinics and camps. And then that kind of evolved to, as I would talk to moms at these clinics and players and seeing that the real issues I dealt with were still prevalent, the lack of confidence, incompetence. So I started to cater what I was doing to seeing what I was seeing, even at just those camps and talking to people
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a bit about what mental skills education and mental skills training really is. I think a lot of times people hear that and they automatically think mental health. And we know that they kind of can go hand in hand and overlap nicely, and one can influence the other, but they are definitely different. And so if you could kind of just give us a little brief education on how those are similar and different, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of one of the biggest issues we've had with what we're doing is people are a little uneducated on what mental skills are. And there's also a lot of preconceived notions about that it's directly related to mental health. And there are times that it is, but there's just a lot of question marks around it. And I think anytime people hear the word mental, they have thoughts and feelings about that word, and it conjures up, um, you know, sort of how you were raised plays a huge role in all of that. So what we define mental skills as is social emotional learning skills and executive functioning skills. And all of those skills are being taught within the education system, no matter if you're in public education, private education. There's a big push in education to teach children all of the types of skills that we kind of grew up with. It was embedded in the curriculum, but now it's being talked about more within the curriculum. So we're looking at, how to work with others, collaboration, belief in yourself, perseverance, the growth mindset. All of those things are now kind of directly, deliberately taught consistently in education. So we're not sports psychologists. We don't pretend to be. I think sports psychologists are wonderful, but they are very theory based. It can be very individualized. So we kind of take a lot of the curriculum that kids are learning in schools, and we're just applying it to sport and giving them vocabulary and language around how this relates to sports. So it's really having to educate players, coaches, and parents on that your child is already going through this. They're doing this in school. They're not expected to just be competent at school or be mentally tough in school or know how to persevere in school. They're being taught how to do those things.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, in soccer, and I think most youth sports, it's either you have it or you don't. Your kid is either competent or they're not, or they have a growth mindset or they don't. And that's so unfortunate because the brain is a muscle and we can grow that too, just like we can grow any other muscle in our body. So that's our focus, but it does directly relate to the overall mental health of a person and a player.
Mhm.
When these skills are practiced, they strengthen them. And the stronger you are at this skill set, the more tools you have in your toolbox to deal with mental crises and mental illness and being self-aware of when those types of things pop up. I like to equate it to, you look at your body. We are taught from a young age that we're supposed to eat healthy, supposed to get enough sleep, nutrition is pushed. All those things are talked about in school too. They're talked about at the doctor, they're talked about in families. And that's what mental skills are. It should be things we're talking about at all levels, that we're promoting to practice, that it's normalized to discuss. And then go back to your physical body, you're going to have injuries. I equate injury with sort of mental crisis.
Mhm.
Nobody's going to be perfect. You're going to hit, bumps along the way mentally as you progress through your journey as a person and a player. You're going to have crisis moments, and that's
Right.
very normal too. And we need to have tools just like with injury. There's ways to prevent injury. There's ways to prevent crisis. There's ways to deal with injury afterwards. There's ways to deal with crisis afterwards individually and with help. And then there's obviously, the physical component. You're going to have ailments, and I would say the same thing with mental side. There's going to be mental illness that are, predisposed things, that genetic things, all of that you're going to be more inclined to have. And the more you're aware of yourself, the more help you can find yourself. Your family can help you find those things. But that that notion of mental illness is what people think of when they think of mental
Right.
health. And that's just this much of what I'm talking about. And that's the area where I would send somebody to a sports
Sure.
psychologist, a doctor. Those are the really high level types of issues and we're not dealing with those.
Right.
So
Well, and it's a great comparison to the physical side of it, right? It's um preparing yourself and taking care of your physical body, even when those ailments or injuries come up. I know I broke my leg right before recruiting season when I was a junior soccer player. And they're like, oh, you won't play for 6 months. And I'm like, I have to play in 3 months. well, because I'd been an athlete and taking care of my physical body, I actually was able to rebound faster than they had expected,
Wow.
you know? And I think it's the same with like learning those mental skills when you're not in a crisis, allows you to have those, like you said, tools in your toolbox to bounce back a little bit quicker, to recognize it before it becomes out of your control. I just think it's like providing them with such a base level of confidence and understanding of that internal part of themselves. And I mean, that's going to affect all of their life. But yeah, obviously in soccer, being able to kind of bounce back after a bad play, those kinds of things, it really does start to impact how you go about your everyday life. I really think so. So talking about education.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so education for us is a big one at Whistle. We're doing player and coach education, and I know you work a lot with players and coaches and even parents and leagues and all different groups. So I would love to hear a couple of like your big success stories or wins that you feel in working in mental skills education, some things you've seen either with coaches or players that have felt like just these enormous wins for yourself.
Yeah, so we in 2020 we created all these courses. We unveiled them at a time where everybody started Zoom fatigue kind of set in, which was bad timing. So then we took our courses and we were like, how can we make these work in a smaller regard so girls aren't having to be on Zoom so long and all that. So we basically took 12 sessions that we felt were really, really important, and we made those adaptable. We can adapt them to be educating coaches on that one theme, or we can do a parent session on that one theme. And we've gotten, like you said, we've gotten to work with all groups. And when we work with teams, we find it super valuable to be in a group with girls that really know each other and can take exactly what we're talking about and apply it whole group. So we do that a lot. And even just last week, we worked with Columbia Premier SC. I think it was a 2010 group of girls. They were preparing for state cup games. And we did a whole session on reset rituals and response to failure cues. And the coach sat in on it, which is huge. Coaches need to be there. I think we even had a couple of parents on the line. And it was phenomenal. And they won all their games that weekend.
Oh my gosh.
And they sent me, we did a whole session on, I don't know if you're familiar with Becky Burley, came up with the whole green dot lesson.
Mm-hmm.
We did that whole kind of a thing. So I'm taking things from all over the soccer community and just like adapting them to work with children. And it was so great. And they won. They sent me pictures of all their hands in the circle with all their green dots on it.
Oh, I saw
And
that posted on
yeah.
socials. Yeah, I did. Yeah,
So that was like
cool.
That's like the most recent, I would say. But like when it comes to coaches, recently we also for the first time worked with an MLS Next boys level 2009, so 13 and 14-year-old boys.
Nice.
On sort of emotional regulation, anger management, how to communicate effectively when we're all motivated differently and we internalize feedback differently. And that was awesome. We stayed after and talked to their coaches, and they were like, that was phenomenal. And they learned a lot in the session, and they brought that to us. And I think when we have coaches and parents involved, everyone's hearing the same message. It's so much more powerful. And we've gotten to have a lot of those experiences where parents are like, that was so great. Amazing testimonials from our individual mentorship program. We had a great testimony recently with a dad who just like DM'd us on Instagram. And he was like, right after the program stopped, I was sort of wondering if I was going to be able to see growth here, because it's really hard to measure data with mental skills training. And it was about a month after the program, and he DM'd us and he was like, oh my God, she did phenomenally well. And the first thing she said was she wants to share this with her mentor. That made a difference, like that relationship and the connection she made with her mentor made a difference. So we've got a lot of little wins in many different areas, and that's what kind of keeps us going. We're doing this to give back to the sport because we care so much. And I think that's been so fun to get to see those little moments.
Yeah, and I like the parent aspect as well, because I'm a mom, and I know like my daughter, she has some special needs. And when I meet with the teachers and they tell me things they're doing, I'm like, I can do that. I can do that at home with her. So it's really great when you kind of get all those involved, especially when you're talking the age group that you're talking about. My background is in education, and I was always preteens and teens. So they are like the love of my life. I love that age group, and most people think I'm crazy, but They are at such a place where when all of the people in their life can be kind of with that same vision moving forward, you can provide them such support to really grow into such phenomenal human beings. And so I totally agree. Having coaches and and parents in on it is really awesome as well.
Yeah, and I think parents, like I'm a parent too. I have a 13-year-old son, so I'm kind of going through that age with a boy right now, and it's really not that different. And I think as a parent, when the kids are little, parents talk, my kid's walking, is your kid walking? And my kid's crawling, whatever, when they're little. As
Yeah,
kids age, parents get more quiet because you feel judged based on what your kid is doing.
right.
And I think what's really nice about our programming is, when we have these parent sessions, it's one of those like, it's normal if your daughter stopped talking to you, that we're
Yeah,
seeing that everywhere. And they are
right,
like, oh, okay, it's not just my kid. And I
right.
think that's really powerful. They seeing what they see at times too. And that's what's really nice from my perspective. I'm a parent, I'm a coach, and I'm a former player. So I can play all three of those roles. And we have
Sure.
a few people on our staff that play those roles. And that's really powerful because they feel like there's somebody on their side. And at the flip side, I feel like that happens with coaches too. We enter a realm where sometimes it's parents versus coaches, and
Sure.
we have to kind of play that. We see both of your angles, but
Yep.
really, if we just all can get on the same page, it's going to help your kid the most.
Yeah. Well, and you started talking about the mentorship component, and I would love to hear kind of your insight into talking about like the benefits and obviously in particular to those female mentorship relationships. Why is that so important when it comes to the age group that you work with? And, obviously you work with boys and girls, but obviously it's female footballers. So why does that play such a role? Why is that so key?
I think, and the reason that we are female footballers is we've done a lot more research. I worked for Girls Leadership for a little while and got to participate on some of their research, and finding that girls are motivated slightly different than boys.
Hmm.
Girls' trajectory within the sport is slightly different than boys. And so we went with what we know and,
Right.
and what we've studied the most. So we do work with boys, but we are primarily girls. And what we found is girls within the sport, some of the ways they're motivated has more to do with the people around them, who they're playing with, the camaraderie piece, the friendships, all of that do play a larger role. It's always been a little more team oriented, less individualized. I think that is changing right now in our landscape, but I found that a lot of the girls, there isn't a lot of representation. And for my generation, I was the one watching the 99ers play, and that was the
Yeah.
first time I got to see women in soccer. And that did a huge number for me. And like I said, my experience at Cal was so life-changing to be around such strong women that we are basically taking that model of representation and the notion of, if you see it, you can be it. So we're
Yeah.
providing these girls with somebody who's been in their shoes. They know the pressures they're going through. They can help listen, I think, is the number one thing. A lot of these girls don't get listened to, they get talked to. And I
Right.
think that's a big aspect that's missing. We're not always listening to the players. And to be fair, the players don't feel safe or brave enough to speak up. So we provide a safe, brave space for them where they can be listened to and be able to talk to somebody who's been in their shoes. And then they feel heard. And I think teenage girls just want to be heard,
Yeah.
and they want a place where they feel safe enough to talk and be open without feeling judged. So we
Right.
really provide that. And when they have that space, they get to that space of being vulnerable, then we can provide them with those tools. And then they feel like someone's on their side and
Hmm.
someone is there to, advocate for them and empower them to have their own voice. And I think that is what is missing. We highly focus on the pro level and the college level for these aspects, but by the time girls get to the college and pro level, they've created so many bad habits
Yeah.
around mental skills.
Yes.
Their responses and their habits are just against them in a way. So if we can
Right.
start younger, which is why we're doing this younger, then they have the tools by the time they get to that, and they have a voice as they grow through it.
Yeah, and that is so true. I mean, we'll be a Division II league, and we'll be starting in 2024. So the people that are coming up and playing with us will be not much older than your oldest young women that you work with. So I think it is so important to look at all the levels because, yeah, what they're learning and what they're experiencing as teenagers then goes into college with them, goes into if they play amateur or pro, or even if they're just involved in the game in any kind of capacity. I think it really is important if we want to see a difference in all those higher levels. We have to start at the base, right? We have to start with educating our young women to know all those things that they deserve and that they should speak up about, all of those things. So I just really think it's invaluable having your program, and even like I've spoken with Leslie Gallimore from the Girls Academy, and just the things that are happening in that space and in those ages are so key for creating such change in the future. And speaking of that, I would love to hear your hopes for the future, whether that's just for female footballers and some of the young women that you work with, or just soccer as a whole. What are you hoping to see in these next coming years?
Yeah, I think my biggest frustration is, it is really hard to look at the system as a whole and see all of the gaps that are missing. And I am perpetually frustrated with the aspect that youth soccer has become a very affluent, elitist in a way type of sport that's all about kind of money and individuals. And I would love for the sport itself at the youth level to get back to a level of camaraderie, loyalty, caring about the child first, and the whole person. That's a huge part of what we're doing is whole person development, whole player development, and that you're people first and players second.
Yes.
I think when we start at a young age with that, we are going to see much better soccer at the highest levels as adults. So holistically, that's what I hope for. And I want to be a part of that change as much as possible. And not just for my own children's sake, but just for the female side of sport. I believe in, we're trying right now this top-down approach of, the NWSL is having all these issues, so we're trying to combat them there. But we have to start lower because these girls are accustomed to a level of abuse in many ways that they get to these higher levels. They're accustomed to not asking for enough pay or resources because it's starting young. So if we can change it at the younger level, that would be my goal. And then for female footballers, I just want to, grow our organization to be able to work with as many girls, clubs, teams, parents, coaches that we can, so that's kind of how it starts. And I think for me, I try to do a lot of speaking engagements and events and things like this just to get the conversation started with lots of different groups, because that conversation, we're still seeing a lot of coaches who are, and I always equate things to the education world. As a teacher, my job was to differentiate to meet the needs of my students while also maintaining a style that I have and standards that are across the board. And I feel like we have a lot of coaches who are doing that. We have coaches who really do care, who are differentiating to meet the needs of their players, who are listening to their players. But we still have a group of coaches that are a little anxious. It's my way or the highway. These kids are soft. And it's like, we have to grow with the way society is growing. And the kids we're coaching these days are not the same kind of kids from the 80s. Like they are under way different pressures, way different the system that they're in schools and their social structures have completely changed. And we need to change with that. So a big part of what we want to do with female footballers is just have more of those conversations and work with as many people as we can.
Yeah. And and you bring that up, and it's so true, because I talk about it a lot with when I was teaching, just kind of the input. There was just so much input coming at kids every day that growing up, like you said, in the 80s, we didn't have that. It wasn't so fast and going, right? Like it's almost this wheel that is spinning, and it's, we are seeing more anxious kids. We are seeing kids with more mental health concerns and things like that. And it is because we are laying a blanket of what used to work on top of something that it just doesn't fit, right? So I think it is really crucial that we keep growing and progressing in that way on all of our levels, so that we can see that progress in the game. And I agree. I mean, I think I was just recently speaking with somebody about, we have a pillar that is safe and strong. And one of the things I said is, I'm like, you should want players to feel safe regardless, right? Just from being a good human being, that's what you should want to do. But also from that competitive side, people don't grow where they don't feel safe. And so, like you had mentioned, creating these spaces and educating young women to, be their best selves will lead to then even better soccer ultimately, right? I mean, so it's kind of like, it's a win-win, right? So investing in that side of your athletes really then starts to pay off, even on the field.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, great. So I am so happy to have you on today, and thank you so much for your time. I will be sure to link female footballers and stuff like that when this goes live so that everybody can check you guys out. But thank you again
Yeah.
for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be able to talk about this kind of stuff any chance that we get. And yeah, definitely link what we have. We have a mentorship program coming up in the summer. Always looking for more girls that we can work with. We have a lot of awesome mentors that we're interviewing right now for those roles. And there's some NWSL players and college players. And so the more girls we can pair with these girls, the better. So
I
thank
know
you.
I'm very excited for once our teams start announcing and all of that, of being able to then share like with players that they can, be mentors and stuff, because
Yeah.
that will be one way that I really love the way our league could kind of be involved with organizations like yourself, is becoming mentors and stuff, because I know so many players would have loved to have that. And so to be that now would be really rewarding for them as well. So I'm sure I'll be sending plenty of women your way.
Awesome. Good, good, good.
Well, thank you,
Thank you so
Kassie.
much for
Thank
having me.
you. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you guys found that as valuable as I did. Such great information. Please join us next month, Wednesday, June 7th, where our guest will be Joanna Hoffman from Athlete Ally, and we will be talking about all things inclusion. If you are somebody working to make a change in the women's game, be sure to tag us on social media so we can see your culture in action. And until next time, be bold, go out and make a difference.